What a treat.
Yeah, I love this committee.
What a treat.
Good to see you.
Okay. Hi.
Hello. Welcome, welcome. Got you in here.
How's the miles going on?
Well, it was just a bias with the operating. Cities called us. They put a pump down there, it was great, it wasn't working, almost working.
What's time? It is 4:03.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start the meeting at 4:03 with 4 of 6 members present and with Commissioner Dominguez and her aide and with Debbie Tackett here and Stewart and welcoming everybody to the meeting. The first order of business is to approve the minutes of the last meeting, which thank you, Amy, for doing that. It was an epic task. We did a lot.
It's supposed to know.
So
Took it very seriously.
I'll make a motion to approve them. Do I have a second?
A second.
Kurt seconds it. All in favor?
Aye.
Very good. And the minutes are passed.
Can I bring up a motion, or just a non-motion, but I have a business for that, for the last meeting?
Yeah.
Just, we brought up, point up that, there's a lot of communication with the city and local residents. And this just kind of stuck out, that causes confusion amongst the residents, because it was following the commission meeting, which you attended, I know, and our meeting with Joe Gomez. I found it really unusual that one of the commissioners, I won't even name names, and I'll show this to you, Claire, first.
Was it me?
No.
Yeah, we weren't gonna
It was
show
an
it
email.
to you.
It was an email, no.
Yes.
Okay, sure. It was like, remember the first street, they were gonna remove all the trees from the first street?
Yes.
When they installed the pipes, and Joe Gomez is assured that the trees are gonna be replaced with similar size and variety, all right? Well, this was posted on Instagram the following day.
What does it say? Can you
It
just
says,
recap it?
how the commissioners vote to remove the trees on First Street. Which is not true at all. Okay, this is a prime reason why there's this communication in the city,
Right.
okay?
Right.
And this
Miscommunication
is-
easy to do on social media.
Right, but this is, the people that follow her are the crazies in the city, and they're gonna think, oh, they're gonna rip out all these trees and they're not gonna be replaced. So that's the problem we have, the communication.
Well, addressing miscommunication is part of the communication function.
Right.
We don't have anybody from communication here, but everybody knows that that's a part of the challenge.
Right.
always. I
But
know,
that should not come from our commissioners. That should, the
Understood.
commission, that should not be done.
thank you, Bill. Thanks for bringing it up. Yeah, we'll keep talking to our commissioners, clearly. Okay, so we're happy today to have 2 presentations, and Debbie Tackett, who is the Chief Preservation Officer and Architecture Officer for the city, is going to talk to us about local regulation of non-conforming and unsafe structures. And Debbie, I think you're first up.
Sure. Well, thank you first of all for inviting me today. It's a real pleasure. For those who don't know me, I'm Debbie Tackett. I'm with the planning department, and I manage pretty much all the activities happening in our historic districts. And I'm staff to the Historic Preservation Board. We do the chair of our Historic Preservation Board here today for unrelated matters. But yes, I wanted to update you on what is the legislative action in Tallahassee this past session. The governor actually signed into law, I think it was the end of April or in May, the Resiliency and Unsafe Structures Act is the name of the act. What that does, and we fought really hard through the whole process. The initial bill was to basically say any building that is non-conforming to the current FEMA regulations, that is also within a flood zone, may be demolished without any action required from the Historic Preservation Board or any other board related activity. And this was the initial bill. it said the replacement construction can be as tall and as big as zoning allows and does not require the review of a board at a public hearing. So, the planning department provided assistance to our lobbyists, and Commissioner Fernandez was actually very front and center. He spent a lot of time in Tallahassee. And the final bill, what it says is any building located seaward of the CCCL, which is the Coastal Construction Control Line, that is non-conforming to current FEMA regulations, may be demolished without historic preservation board review. However, the new replacement construction would still have to go through the historic preservation. So that's very important, right? Because that's our public process. The bill did exempt our National Register Historic District, basically the architectural district in South Beach, which runs from 6th Street north to 23rd Street on the ocean. I have a map here, since this is a resiliency committee, I didn't print a map for everyone, but I can certainly email this to you. Basically, it's oceanfront properties that are now going to, if they want to demolish, are gonna skip that additional public review at the Historic Preservation Board. There is a portion south of 5th Street that is included in that preemption. Then we go north of 23rd Street, up until about south of the Fontainebleau. Then from 44th Street to 53rd Street, these are the historic districts. We also have the North Shore Historic District where the Deauville is located. And then in North Beach, the Harding Town site, which would be Ocean Terrace and portions the east side of Collins Avenue. So we're basically looking at the east side of Collins Avenue, except for the Art Deco district in South Beach. That will now, if they want to demolish, they come in for permit review. The city will review it in accordance with the Florida Building Code and sign off on the demolition permit if it complies with the Florida Building Code. Again, we're at least grateful that the Art Deco district was spared from that. And we're at least grateful that replacement construction can still go through our public hearing review process. But it's definitely disappointing. It's definitely a blow to historic preservation. And it's upsetting because throughout the process, this was actually heard at the previous legislative session, was not adopted or signed, and in this latest one, we were hopeful again that we could, use our lobbying force against it. But it's disappointing because during that basically 2-year process, it was clear that Miami Beach was a target. We live in Florida. We have many coastal communities that are facing the same issues that we are. We met with Key West, we met with town of Palm Beach, and some other, St. Augustine, some other coastal communities that were initially threatened. Eventually, all of those communities were carved out of this legislation, which really led us to believe that we were the bullseye of the attempt here. So currently, I can tell you, once this bill was signed into law, I was kind of nervous, and I know a lot of, these are a lot of condominiums with multiple residents, that I was gonna get a rash of demolition permits coming through. That has not happened yet. What has happened, which is interesting, is property owners of these buildings that can now be demolished have been approaching me in a very initial kind of discussion matter, saying, we know we can demolish our building now. We don't really want to. We want to save a little tiny piece of it, but they're trying to kind of negotiate, and I'm the wrong person to negotiate with, which is what I advise them. They're trying to say, we want to save, the front wall of the building, but that's going to be really expensive. So what can the city do for us? That's what I'm seeing more than anything. is property owners kind of using this bill as leverage. And that's also a concern.
With the city, were they trying to leverage with the city?
Apparently, to get probably more development regulations, right? To get a taller height or to get more FAR is what I've been approached with for multiple properties. Nothing, you know, and I advise them that there's a process for that. They can certainly submit a private application to increase height and increase FAR. No one has done so to this point. But you know, it's kind of a game and it's sad because this is so important to us. We have a very reasonable historic preservation board that can approve demolition and does approve demolition where it's reasonable and appropriate. So we're really under a lot of pressure, and I think this bill is just making it more challenging. So far, it hasn't resulted in a rash of demolitions. That may change, especially with these larger condo buildings. Several residents have reached out to me, very concerned, especially in, you know, the North Beach or the Morris Lapidus district. That, you know, they've heard rumors that a developer's gonna force them to sell their units. And, you know, there's not much I can do about that, but I can let them know, listen, you know, that any replacement construction would have to go through a review process. It's also interesting to note that a lot of the properties are over the maximum allowable. So maybe developers aren't gonna wanna demolish everything because to keep the square footage and the height of some of the properties, they wouldn't be able to demolish and rebuild unless they submitted for a text amendment and got what they want, which is more height and more FAR for what.
That was what I was gonna ask you, is are there any that wouldn't be smart to demolish? And that's what you just asked.
Yeah, it's real, I didn't anticipate this because all of my focus was on, you know, doing the best we can to ensure, at least if we're not saving buildings, the proper review of any demolition. So I was just scared that, okay, they're just gonna be demolished and without any real public input, without any real analysis, but that's not what's happening.
It seems like a lot of the buildings that are being torn down, especially up in like by the fountain and below, they're being replaced by smaller footprint buildings. You know, larger units, but less units. Like, I think it's called La Sol, one of the buildings, I think it's
Yes.
at 48th and Collins.
And that is true,
And I'm not so opposed to that.
they are, the projects we've seen, especially along the ocean front, when buildings are demolished, like the Marlborough House, they are being replaced with lower density developments, right? These are ultra luxury. Oceanfront is not gonna be your workforce affordable housing. These are ultra luxury units that are often, you know, starting at 4,000, 5,000 square feet and up. So there's gonna be less units. That is definitely the pattern, especially along the oceanfront.
Right.
Yeah, two questions. First of all, we're on the subject of condos. When you said that you get people who live in condos are afraid they're going to be forced out, don't they? I mean, don't they have to have a vote of the owners? And I mean,
And I mean, that's where my guidance is very challenged, right? Because each condo association is gonna have different rules in terms of what percentage of the units, you know, result in someone taking control of the property. I think that's gonna be in their condo docs and, you know, if they're concerned about it, they really should talk to an attorney or someone who understands that stuff. But I think, you know, I've gotten calls from people in the Seacoast, you know, a lot of elderly people. And there, you know, there's just like we were talking about in the beginning, there's misinformation out there. But they're under the impression that if 60% of their units decide to sell, that they're gonna be forced.
60%, that's pretty low. Then the second question is, I think, you know, so if it's only the Art Deco district there, does that mean that, for example, a building like the Brown Hotel, or what's the Brown Hotel, which is I think the first hotel in Miami Beach, that Derek it doesn't require any approval to be torn down and something else put
So-
there?
That property is actually westward of the coastal construction control line. The properties, like the Savoy and the Arlington, on the east side of Ocean Drive, south of Fifth Street, would be subject to the preemption. The Browns Hotel, since it's on the west side, is not.
So that line is that close? I mean, I thought it would be
It's that
like,
close, and again, we've kind of mapped it out, I know this is, the city is so long, it's very difficult to see. But it's gonna be the east side of Collins, primarily, and the east side of Ocean Drive.
West side Bush.
Yeah, there's a
The
reason.
west
West
side,
side Bush, which is the building.
no, the east side is the one that's
But there's so-
vulnerable,
there's so-
except for the Art Deco.
Except for the Art
Which is
Deco.
on the west side.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Savoy Arlington south of Fifth Street, you know, we've been approached by people, saying they want to save the buildings. We'll see.
Oh, really?
That's a while.
I think they're, yes, but
I
we'll
hope so, I
see.
love that building.
They have not submitted anything formally. I know those are, those are two that break my heart and this whole map. I mean, there's, all of them do, but those two especially.
And that's always been in and out of planned, you know, glad, that's where I came in 2001, was the glass tower that was supposed to go
Right.
in the center of the Savoy courtyard. And so, heck, no.
That and the sheriff run that.
But, yeah, so, well, that, is there anything being done right now? Are we working in Tallahassee? Is there anything more that could be done? Are there loopholes? Are there things that people could look at?
So we have not found any loopholes. You know, in addition to working with our lobbyists, our city attorney's office, Nick Kalergis, deputy city attorney, is very familiar with this. We haven't found any loopholes. We haven't, you know, at this point, we don't have a plan for what's already been done, other than to continue to lobby each legislative session to either reverse this or at the minimum, not let this type of activity. It's,
Right.
you know, we were very successful the previous legislative session because we had good partners in other coastal towns. You know, to put it bluntly, we had a lot of Republican areas, Key West, Palm Beach, St. Augustine, that really, you know, helped the voice of historic preservation. Once they whittled it down, there was still a lot of opposition with the Art Deco district, so there's a huge media blast on that, where people just in the thousands from all over the world were upset about it. Once they carved that out, things got very quiet in terms of support. Other than our, you know, our internal team fighting against it, we were almost the only ones fighting against it. The Florida Trust helped us, the National Trust, you know, submitted something to the legislature, but
So here is something that, just forgive me for what I don't know, okay? But here's something that comes in, under the guise of, you know, unsafe structures, non-conforming uses. We're talking about resiliency issues as well. Are all these properties, are many of these properties in jeopardy from a resiliency standpoint? I mean, of course, everybody is because of sea level rise, and we know the problems we have. But are there properties that truly are in jeopardy? Or is this just being used? I mean, it's obviously being used to get the properties demolished if we want them. But are there things that really should be being done? Maybe this kind of gets into what Stuart's going to talk about. But are there things that people can do? And you can't make something that's unsafe or non-conforming suddenly conforming, especially if you have a mandate already to take it down. But I'm looking for some wiggle room. I guess there isn't.
Well, I mean, it is true, I mean, all of these properties, the vast majority, anything that was built prior to 2000 is gonna be non-conforming.
Right.
There are things that property owners can do. You see these oceanfront properties being substantially redeveloped, right? At that point, they're all being upgraded, maybe not to 100% compliance. But the oceanfront properties, what's interesting about the oceanfront properties is they're actually the highest land
Right.
elevation. So that's what kind of shows you that this wasn't necessarily for resiliency. We have a much lower elevation and more vulnerable properties toward the western portion of our city. You know, I think oceanfront properties have unique challenges, especially structures that were built out of concrete with the salt and the wind coming from them. We see challenges with 40-year recertifications, a lot of these buildings with balconies, needing major structural upgrades. But for the most part, in terms of the flooding, you don't see that as much on the oceanfront properties as you do with other parts of the city.
Yeah, and just as a refresher, because I know there's also the other law that has to do with, you know, you provide 40% of your units in affordable housing. How, what are the historic restrictions, if any, on people who want to use that?
And that's a great question, because what I'm seeing is we had these two really impactful bills signed in this session. The Live Local is the one that talks about the 40%. That particular bill is applicable to any commercial or mixed-use historic district as well. However, that bill does not preempt any regulatory review of demolition. So say someone wanted to do a Live Local and they wanted to demolish half of the building. Well, and they're not within the oceanfront, which they're not gonna be for affordable housing. That would still require going to the Historic Preservation Board for the demolition. What it wouldn't require, it's kind of the opposite of the resiliency. It wouldn't require a Historic Preservation Board review for the new replacement construction. So, yeah, it's really confusing, right? Because it's the opposite of what the Resiliency and Safe Structures Act does, which says demolition doesn't need HPV, but the replacement does. Live Local says the demolition would need HPV, but the replacement would have to be reviewed and approved administratively. We do have a process. We scrambled with the Live Local. We do have a process for the administrative review of the new affordable housing portion, which does require a mail notice to property owners. It also requires staff, which we will do anyways, but it spells out that staff is to review the new Live Local design tower in accordance with the same review criteria that we would be sending to the board, so that we can have some authority over our requirements and design changes, some setback, massing type changes. We cannot limit the height, and we cannot limit the FAO. But there are other things from an urban design perspective, from an architectural design perspective, that we can do to make it better.
But you're also seeing you're also seeing negotiations with the
Yes.
Live Local, with people saying, well, I could do Live Local, but I'm not going to, so what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, and it's
If I
not
can
just
make a
Cleveland,
comment, I'm hearing from developers, so they all wanna do luxury residential, and luxury don't wanna live with workforce housing, and that's what the local is, so thank goodness they don't like that, because that's what's preventing a lot of it. The only ones that have come before me are the Clevelander, and it was the most awful, massive, terrible thing to Ocean Drive, I feel. But they're back at the drawing board, I believe. And then I'm hearing that Russell Galvin has been sniffing around for Sunset Harbor, there's a building there, he owns some parcels of land, and he's thinking about doing something there, but I haven't seen anything concrete other than that. And another thing that bothers me about all of this is the commission recently did a field trip to FDOT, and we were talking to the secretary, Stacy Miller, about our traffic and congestion and their projects, and can they make sure that they're timed with the county and our city stuff so that we're not at a gridlock. And then we mentioned this live local, she goes, you guys are at capacity. And to think that in Tallahassee, they can vote for all of this additional density when our city's at capacity is irresponsible. And I really hope we get somebody quick to fill Marsha Montserrat's shoes, because she did a great job with our government affairs. And the rest of us need to continue to fight and be vigilant.
Absolutely. And I think Commissioner, to this point, when the secretary is talking about capacity, it tends to do with those evacuation routes, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, we are a barrier island and we have to evacuate and have to be able to do that in a way that is safe and that we're not constantly increasing, I think, that. And that comes from other state documents, right? Doesn't it?
Correct.
Is it a comprehensive plan?
Our
or is it-
comprehensive plan, and there's other state regulations that limit the amount of development and evacuation zones. But if you read the Live Local, it preempts all of that.
That's it.
So crazy, it's
It's
even an
really is,
evacuation
yeah.
zone, like it doesn't make any sense,
Right.
but we'll keep fighting.
If there's anything we can do, if there's anything we can do as a committee, I think that's really let us know.
Absolutely.
I'm certainly concerned, and we're grateful for the time and also for everything you do, because I know how hard you work.
I'm grateful to be here and I'm grateful to work for this amazing. We have problems, but we're fantastic. I mean, we did so good over the past weekend compared to other communities. And I'm very proud. I'm proud of the work you guys do.
Thanks for coming. Anybody else have questions for Debbie? No? Okay, well, thank you. You're welcome to stay if you'd like, but you.
I don't know, am I next?
Yes.
Yes.
You're gonna stay? Oh,
You're
my
sitting
goodness.
in the hot
All right, I'm gonna go
I
up
love
here,
this.
cause I think you guys are gonna see the presentation from here, yeah, I'm gonna do it like this, so.
So just give me a moment to get it shared on Zoom, if that's okay.
Okay,
John,
for sure.
maybe you could tell everybody, you have a wonderful title and you have a job that sounds like everyone would want it. Could you just tell us a little bit about what you do for FIU?
For sure,
For people
yes.
who don't know.
Okay, well, I moved to Miami Beach 30 years ago to just be at Miami Beach without a job. It was just be here. My partner and I looked at 5 other places, Puerto Rico, Los Angeles, decided to be here, and then found jobs. And so I've been at FIU for 30 years, and I have a background in classics and mathematics and applied mathematics and classical archaeology and an architecture degree that was kind of combining many of those. And so I've been really interested in technology and the impact on history and how we can kind of build a better future. And I've always been kind of a futurist, so even my thesis at Columbia was about this kind of verdant green city that could kind of feed everybody in this kind of future world, and that was a long time ago. So anyway, and at FIU I've been chair of the architecture department, and now I'm running a couple of facilities that are focused on, the one on Miami Beach is focused on 3D printing, and there's one in Wynwood as well, and I'm an associate dean for cultural and community engagement. So kind of looking at the future of the university as something that's more engaged with communities that it's in, and I'm sorry for being behind you. And I've recently kind of chaired the university strategic plan, 2030 strategic planning committee around one of their pillars, which is cultural and community engagement. So hopefully by 2030, a lot of what we do here in Miami Beach, working together and having forums like this, will be something that the university does in all kinds of ways. So this, to give you an idea, this class kind of developed in 2018, while I was on the Historic Preservation Board for the first time, my first tour of duty, and I was on the, also, I'm on the board of the Miami Beach Chamber of Commerce, where I met Mark Sandelin, who was a new commissioner, and I heard what Mark was talking about, and then went and talked to him about the possibility of kind of, at that time we were doing MOUs and kind of doing an MOU that would help the city to envision a future for itself that was resilient, that had that kind of tested some of these resilient theories, but also was testing it and presenting it through visualization, something that architecture students are particularly good at. So because we were finding that people were just like, they were hearing the word resilience and just shutting down. It's like, oh no, I don't want to hear about the numbers of sea level rise. Okay, for what's that mean for me? Like, where's the sea right now? And so we didn't have a way to do that. So we kind of I've been working on this class for the last several years, and then each year bring groups of about 16 students to Miami Beach, and two stars of the class are Debbie Tackett and Knowles. Debbie helps to select the where we work, and so maybe you can go. So this is just an image from this past year, showing the kinds of things. So each one of these things, each one like this pathway for a kayak or this public transportation is supposed to provoke a conversation. It's supposed to help people say, oh, how would we do this? Like, how do we get there? How do we get from where we are today to there? But they wouldn't know to even ask to get to there if they didn't see it. I have the students for one semester. We have limited, and they're architecture students, so I'm taking them through the architecture, the historic preservation. There are lots of elements to this class. So we're happy in the end if we can get to kind of big questions about a historic building, reuse, what's happening, and how we're getting around in this. So can you, okay, perfect. So we start with, as I mentioned, Debbie Tackett, and I'm going to go through this last year, kind of what we did. We look at a block, and one of the interesting things I think about this is that we look at the social fabric of the historic block as being part of its resiliency strategy. So to understand exactly where people come from, why buildings were built, who was involved, and what else they've done, because we try to find patterns in these. And you can see these are just each one of the students, they pick a building, and or they do it in pairs or individually, and then we get the whole block together. Next, please. We start by Debbie provides us with the building cards. So this is an information that's been scanned. These kind of stopped being created in this form in the 1970s. But so each student gets, the name of the architect, the name of the owner, the address, and all this information kind of comes together. And what they really what they are tasked to do is to find out how the owner and the architect met each other, how they met the contractor, how they worked on other projects together before, what are the things that they've done. And the idea is that these are kind of the DNA of resilience, understanding, like in your own experience with your own, dwelling, you will probably remember who the plumber was who fixed this, who did something else in your building. Good job or bad job, that's what we need to know. Good concrete, bad concrete, whether it's 1935, 1985, 2005. So the idea is that they kind of identify who's doing things when, things are coming in. This particular building is the one I'm going to take, 751 Meridian Avenue. I think the student, Shannon Bishop, did a great job with it. We go through things, the next slide, please. So we go through things like sea level rise, where it is now, exactly where it is below your feet right now, and where it's scheduled, where it's planned to be. We basically look at about 48 inches. Next, please. The students have to understand where the mean high water, this is a very critical mean high water mark is for us, versus, and we have to compare what that line is compared to where their ground level is. And for architecture students who, I'm just I don't know whether you know this already, but every architecture student in every architecture class starts with 0, wherever their ground is, whether they're on the top of Mount Everest or at the bottom of Death Valley, it's always 0. And their building, if it's 4 stories tall, then it's always 48 feet or whatever, 50 feet. But here, we have to start thinking differently, and this is the first shift in this resiliency plan to kind of get students to realize there is a data against which we have to measure a moving target, which is the tide, and a constantly moving target, and the height of your building. So we go to the next. So they study the free board ordinance, which kind of helps them to understand this was recently redone. They look at this. Next. And they look at this Miami Beach adaptation calculator, which shows them exactly how high the ground is. So in this case, in this particular building, this was 2.4. This ground is at 2.4 in NAVD, I think, and if you remember, the mean high water is 0.33. So they have to understand that they have, about 2 feet to work with there, and we realize that's not a lot. If that goes up and rain comes down, you quickly fill up like we did the other day. They look at
Just real
yes,
quick
yeah.
on
You
that,
want to go back?
if that's okay. So this is really cool because the city created this tool. It's an adaptation calculator, so people could understand in relation to their home's elevation, what is the height of the roadways in front of them, and what may it be in the future based on the city's elevation goals, going into, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. So it was actually created for the residents, and things have changed so much in the last few years, and so John said, can I use it for my students? And we're like, sure, because it was a lot of work our GIS team did, but this is available and accessible. So you could say, I live here, I want to understand how high my property is, and if we don't have your data, you can input your own elevation data, if you know it. So yeah, it's a cool tool we did.
Sounds like a
That's on the
education
website.
campaign.
Yeah,
You
and
too.
it was because people didn't understand, everybody thought, oh, we're gonna raise roads 3 feet. No, we're not gonna raise roads 3 feet. The goal maybe is 3.7 feet NMD, but it's based on this data
Sure.
in relationship with 0, not necessarily higher than your home. That makes sense.
Yeah, so base flood elevation under that is what. So, because throughout the year, high tide, low tide, and king tide, what is the kind of, what are you assuming as that state of things when you're saying that it's going to be flooded at X number of feet?
We assume, can you go back, one more? Then we assume the mean high water is what we use, the 0.33 NAVD. So this is this level here. Now this is a baseline. That means that, that the tides are controlled by the forces of the moon and the sun, and there's a high tide once a day, and there's also a centripetal tide once a day, and the centripetal tide is lower. So we look at the higher high tide just to kind of get a sense for what the higher high tide would be, not assuming a flooding condition or other kind of catastrophic condition.
When you say mean, that's an average.
Average.
So that means that a certain number of days, even if you're at,
It's higher.
it's higher than, so when you say you're at 2.5 feet above base flood elevation.
No, it's just me, 2.5 feet above, this is that 0, that imaginary 0 datum. The water's at 0.33 and your front yard in this case was at 2.33, let's say, so 2 feet.
Yeah, so how do you know, is there a way to know, let's say you were at 2.33 feet. During the year, how do you know if the water is going to get that high or not?
You look at tidal charts.
Yeah.
And the tidal, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say, and I know where you're going with this because we have this conversation, is that, so in low areas of the city, when, let's say it's just a king tide or a high tide, if it goes above like 1.7 NAVD, like that's sort of our level, So he's talking about 0.33 mean high water, which is just a different datum, say that's like
Right,
zero.
right.
So take that zero, add 1.7 feet on. If the tides go above that, we see flooding from Miami Beach. Now, it's not road inundation, right? It's more like it's coming up through the storm drains, low-lying properties are getting flooded, but that's like our number, about 1.7, 1.8, or you will see it like Commerce Street, right, and Alton, you definitely see it there. We have a lot of documented photography for that. But base flood, you're talking about the FEMA requirements for sort of new builds. So if you think about it, if we flood at about 1.7, 1.8, and FEMA's requiring 8 to 9 feet, that's how high new property should be. So that's the difference. Make sense?
Yeah, and that calculator that you were talking about, does that measure, does that give you your?
That's all in NAVD, and it basically, because there's a lot of properties the city has information for. So they may say, we've got Ron's house, you can plug in your address, you can find his house. You can see what your finished floor is in relationship to the current and future plans of the roads. So you can see, are you higher, are you lower? What is that relationship? And it'll give you like the actual difference.
I'm gonna take this class.
Well, it's confusing, I mean,
It is.
it's incredibly confusing for architecture students too, who are just
It's
used to.
confusing for everyone.
Yes, absolutely everyone, it's too many moving
Employees.
parts.
People.
And it's pretty abstract, I mean, it's very abstract, well, these are datum that can shift, like, okay, ready up.
Well, the datum can't the zero, absolute zero won't shift, but there is work being done on a new datum, which I think is gonna be high, where the zero will be a little higher than in ADD 88. So in 1929, there was a datum that was first made, and that was a little lower, and that's NGBD, and then in 1988, there was a second datum, and that's a little higher, and then there's talk about a new, much more specific datum that's based on satellite imagery and data and stuff like this. Anyway, the class can go in many, many different directions. So, we have people studying which ships people have come through to Ellis Island and how they made their money in the Lower East Side to buy the building here in South Beach as a single mom, as one of the only places that and how they had the cash to, because women couldn't have mortgages at the time. And, so there are a lot of social and scientific things. So let's keep going on this. Look at historic resources of green infrastructure. So this is the cornerstone for the class, the idea that preserving a building is part of a resilience strategy. Next. We invite other architects to come in. Next, please, Jackie and Carlos Jose, who worked on building on Lincoln Road. We invite Aris Papadopoulos, who's a FIU Extreme Events Institute, a distinguished researcher. Obi Siqueira, who's a professor at FIU, to give the students an idea of what the engineering is behind this. Obviously, Amy talks about Rising Above and her efforts. Alan Schulman, this becomes Buoyant City is a city approved report that kind of becomes the cornerstone for our approach. And it's one of many approaches, but this happens to be one that was approved by the commission, and we test drive it with each one of the students. It's a good way for them as students to follow something. And this is as good as anything that we have right now. So let's go to the next one. So Alan provides, and this I'm not taking you through, his talk is like an hour and a half just on this, but he provides different strategies. This one is, for example, raising a floor, changing a residential use in a multifamily building to commercial and residential, which is often one of the interests of the students. Next, he also then help to kind of give a lists of all the strategies that you can have on the rooftop, from wind to cisterns below to keeping a historic part of the building and then adding new and keeping a historic part in the back. Just one possible strategy of many. And he was looking at kind of these as being, and this is very important, I think, for the students to understand, that can be an incentivization here. So you can't just ask somebody to to pay a lot of money for something on their building and not give them any opportunity to somehow earn money from that. And we talk a little bit about this with with students. I asked them about their car. Like, what if somebody just told you had to put like solar panels on your car? Like, okay, you just have to do it. And so it's a kind of thought exercise. And they're like, okay, like first why, and then second, so understand resilience. Second, like how much does it cost? Like, what's it going to do to my car? Will it change the resale value? All these things. And I'm like, those are all the questions you will be asked if you ask any building owner to work like this. And that exercise kind of brings it home in a much more kind of concrete way. And then this year, we haven't done this yet, but we're going to be looking, thanks to Aris's excellent work in this with the Building Resilience Index, we're going to be introducing a building resilience index. So students will actually propose and understand how each one of their activities is contributing to the resilience of the building, which is the index helps you to do. And it's a new thing that we're really excited to try out. And it's really focused more on kind of natural disasters rather than whether the tide is a high or high tide or a medium high tide or whatever. So let's take Shannon's example, 751 Meridian Avenue, and this is her presentation. So I'm just showing you her slides, and because I want to show you what a student in the class does. So she first she got her building. She's got a 1960s building. She looks at the building. She's looking at who the architect contractor are. What's next? That's okay. She draws the building, so the historic buildings are all documented. And guessing in many cases, because you can't walk into these buildings and draw them and survey them, and puts them up. She studies them, studies their elements and their attributes. Next.
And I guess I have a question here. So
Yes.
for the interior of the building, is she also using stuff that's posted online as far as like apartment rentals or?
Yes.
Okay.
You'll see. She is each student becomes a stalker par excellence. They've even actually, I thought if Galen we did Galen's apartment was the student kind of ended up seeing him. She did his building and he talked to her. This was a couple of years ago though. So do a three-dimensional model to kind of understand how it fits into this community. And then starting to study who the architect is. In her case, this is a 60s architect, and and it's so interesting because she goes back to the Sanborn maps and realizes and looks for the original buildings on the site, because it's a 60s building, but before that there were a couple of cottages. There's a bungalow and a cottage on there. And she realizes that Charles Markle is the architect, I think, and I think she talks about this in this slide, maybe in the next slide. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so Markle does other buildings in the city and in our area, and loses his license. So we see but they study everything. They study murders, marriages, music lessons, like all these things that come together. But we were trying to find buildings and find all of their characters. Next. He's working with a guy, with a contractor, Daniel Blankenship, this is one of his last buildings that he worked on before he moved up to Nova Scotia and became permanently involved with Oak Island, the treasure of Oak Island, which you may have heard about being something. I mean, there are all these people searching for it. They think they found it. They dig and they, whatever. But just because I want the students to realize that these buildings, their lives of the buildings are the lives of people who are involved with the buildings, and that just as today, all of us in this room form part of what this building's life is, and each of our lives coming together here. So there's kind of that philosophical overlay. Next, please. They look at people who was living here. So the building was a strictly Jewish private home in the 20s. I mean, that's in the 30s, but and then later when it's sold. But so looking at, these are just some examples of looking at people selling furniture, people renting apartments. How do they describe the building in these simple, and they use newspaper.com and ancestry.com. And I should just say this is unusual because universities don't subscribe to this. You can't go to FIU's library and log in and say, oh, I wanna look at my ancestry. They just don't subscribe. But Ancestry is one of the most important places to find ship manifests, to find how people are related to one another. And when they get married, because they're looking at why architects are here, why is Marco here? How did he meet? She didn't actually figure out exactly how they met, how he met Blankenship, but anyway. So, and then they go up to the present, looking at listings at LinkedIn, and she found in this case that this was a short-term rental. And so she keep going, next time. So, and she emailed the guy who was running the short-term rental. And he emails her back and tells her that they're the NNN tenants, I think it's the triple N, meaning if you're a triple N tenant, you pay the mortgage, you pay the insurance, you pay everything for the building. There's nothing left for the real owner to actually pay. And so he talks about how this was grandfathered into this and how it's unusual. And so anyway, you uncover way too much when you do this, but it's important for students to realize, I think, these histories. Next, so she takes this existing building, does this section, looking at exactly where that line is, where the 4 inches would be 0.33, where the existing mean higher high water level is, where it will be in 2070, looking at the design flood elevation and design flood elevation plus freeboard to see kind of what would need to happen. Next. And then proposes this redesign in large part because it's not a contributing building at the moment, but still she was interested in some of the aspects of it and the way it was open and created a courtyard in the middle. And notice she also made a fresh market and a planter storage, which I believe there's I think they're also, I think they kind of grow food, and we often look at the way blocks can become sort of places of resilience for communities. So a block can be a storage area for food. It can also be a shelter in place there, have a shelter in place on it, or it can have an energy storage area. Yeah.
Quick question. So, and you might be getting, but did they also look at all the kind of green possible solutions that can go into the?
Yeah, so that's what these are.
Okay.
These are kind of her following the model, looking at what has been suggested there. Okay. Yeah, underground storage, permeable pavement, rain gardens, injection wells, blue roofs, where the water's kept on the roof, things like that. Yeah.
Question as well. What about green roofs?
Green roofs, yes. Blue roofs where their rainwater is kept and is stored and is filtered.
And if people do that, just as a follow-up, but if people do, decide to do a green roof, how does that affect their insurance? Because it seems like it would affect the insurance rates. They would cancel the policy.
Yes, and that's definitely a possibility. And when students kind of think about these narratives, they kind of also think about how insurance would have to be, and other kind of what the benefits would be to the owner. Because if it's just a burden, why would you possibly do that? Why would you load your roof with water? Of all places you'd want to have a blue, or why would you load it with plants? So yeah, those questions, that question and questions like it would lead to policy questions about like what are we really trying to do? So somebody could pick this apart for all of those policy questions, like putting a cistern down here wouldn't be allowed, putting any retail on the first floor wouldn't be allowed. And things like that in the current environment. And this is where, Commissioner Samuel and I were kind of talking about how images, and it's not even this is more technical for the architecture student, but this is to get them to make sure they're kind of checking these boxes. Maybe we can go to the next image. And so then she starts to kind of present these were her drawings for this particular project. And you can see the blue infrastructure that you were talking about, the cisterns on the roof that would filter down. Next. So one of the things that we do is we use AI, usually ChatGPT, to be our client. So each student has their own client, and they say, suppose you live at 751 Meridian Avenue, this is the history, and they give it the whole history. Who lives there in 2070, and where do they come from, what do they need, what's their family history, what's happening in the building, and they have a kind of relationship with this client. And our students and students in general of architecture are really bad at being clients. They're not training to be clients. If they were trained to be clients, they'd be in business school. They're training to be, responding to client needs. And so this is a good way to do this. So we use AI, and in this case, and this is one of the reasons why I showed this, she also used AI because she wasn't able to find online diverse people that she thought would be living here in the future, images of them in something that she thought they might be doing. So she used DALL-E and used AI to create images of people doing things, and then she put them into this environment. Like, you just can't go online and find an image of a Black couple holding a basket of fruit. It's just you're not gonna find it. But if that's what you need to show your idea for your building, you can have AI will create it for it, and that's what she did. So she's looking at completely different idea of what the street frontage would be like. If you notice, she kind of did a little quick switcheroo from the section. She has a stair going up here to show that the whole building was raised. The first floor was raised to freeboard, and then these are again more images of AI, and the students are all like drone obsessed. There's always a drone in 2070. It's gonna be like you're gonna need a drone swatter instead of a fly swatter just to get them out of your space. But anyway, and then next, and then so this is because I was just showing one student's work, and that was the end. Go back one. So this is the end of her project, and you can kind of see her design style and her drawing technique. So go to the next. So this is another student in that same class on another project on the block showing a green roof instead of a blue roof, in which things are being grown up there. Next. This was another student in the class who was showing kind of what the usage of the street could be in flooded conditions. What?
It looked like my street.
Yeah, it looked like I was just in there, I know, except I was in a car, a very low car. And then this was, obviously showing the kinds of transportation, permeable pavement, a kind of greenness, and obviously drones everywhere. And I think, and then this, I think this might be the last one, but showing, so in this case, it's one of the alleys is being used, or connection to the alley is being used to get to buildings, and the historic building has kind of green on it and things like this. And is there one more? Sorry. Oh, and then the last thing I was going to say is that this whole thing with AI has led to a research project in which we're trying to train an AI tool. I'm working with Debbie on this, and a professor of data science at FIU, to train AI to read the building cards and to make the connections between buildings, because there are just too many to know, but to read it and be able to find patterns and to be able to then help. And it will also have information, we hope, about the elevation of the building, which is not on the card, and about tidal expected tidal tides. And the idea is that because this is such big data, there are over 10,000 of these cards, and then there are thousands of buildings that were built after the cards were discontinued, and that data should be in there too. So the idea is that this city could have this tool to understand its built environment for private residents, to know more about like what's happening. So for example, if your windows are, if you want to replace your windows, you should be able to go to this tool and say, okay, a little bit like Amazon, like, okay, I'm interested in windows, this is where I live. And it should say, oh, this built the same year by the same architect was these other buildings, and they've changed, this building has changed its windows, or these two need to be changed. And you could then maybe come together as a collective and all purchase windows together if you were all ready to do something like that. But it allows you to be a kind of smarter, maybe a smarter shopper when you're shopping for resiliency actions. And so we're still in the process of working on the user interface and kind of also getting the training the AI to read these very complex building cards, which people have written on and crossed out and stamped over and all this stuff. So anyway, that was my presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It just seems like there's so many
Put it on the first
tools in the toolkit here that are being created by the work that the students are doing, that you're doing with the AI. You know, that can be available for any projects where buildings need to be upgraded, almost like up leveled. That's really true too. And that there could be a tool for people to look at other, you know, resiliency solutions they could use on them that they might not think of. If they thought, well, we want to do something with the building, want to make it more resilient for the future. What do we do? How do they access your information? Maybe you already did their building. You know,
Right, no, it's possible. I mean, and no, there's so many ways in which, so we've been published and after like I think around 2020, maybe 2021 in the Miami Beach magazine, the work of the students in envisioning this future. And the hope is that, you know, committees like yours would be just knowing about it might, you know, Amy, I give all the images to Amy, and I think you use them for
Yeah,
presentations.
They're
and
wonderful for
those-
presentations when you know, wanna help people visualize like maybe the kind of issues in housing stock we have now and what it could be through the eyes of a student and using this foundational plan.
Right, because like you said, if they can't see it, can't really
Right.
imagine it.
Right.
We're all visual. And so, but those are available. So if we maybe, I mean, on the Rising Above part of the website, does it have that information?
I think it does. I would have to check
Maybe
to see which
somehow.
ones we have on there.
With one tool where you can plug in your property address.
Well, and that one is actually right now, it's not activated for residents because the road elevation goals have changed in our city. Whereas, you know, a few years ago, there was one adopted goal to be at 3.7 feet NAVD. And then a huge study was done with Jacobs Engineering, and now it's even a little bit higher. And there's two different goals. One is for the major arterial roads, and another one is for the more side roads, and that goal is lower. Every 5 years, that goal has to be changed with sea level rise as it goes up. Because there's a direct relationship there. So that system would have to be completely updated by the public works team. So it exists, but John is using it, but it would be a pretty big lift to update it to today's. And then, you know, each neighborhood is different. And, you know, there's a lot of fluctuation and change in terms of what's gonna happen with elevation.
But nevertheless, it provides a lot of information.
Yeah.
For people to think about when they're planning some kind of renovation, they know they have to address residency. How do you choose which blocks you look at?
I don't. It's our partnership with the city.
And it's a great fun for me because although I'm familiar with the whole city, it's not often I get to, you know, look at such a granular level at a block and, you know, I find, oh, that's such a cute building, you know, and so it's really fun. And we're gonna do another one coming up, so I gotta scour, we've been sticking with Flamingo Park. The Boyne City Guidelines used Flamingo Park as one of their test areas. And it's just, you know, it's such a rich diversity of architectural typologies and styles, which I think is helpful. Because, you know, some of the 1950s buildings have different challenges. They have low floor to ceiling heights. Air conditioning, you know, starting in the 1950s. They have exterior walkways, whereas an Art Deco building is gonna have high floor ceilings. If they didn't have air conditioning, and they're gonna have interior circulation. So there's, you know, I think what's interesting is the city's historic fabric is kind of repetitive with these certain typologies. And so I try to pick a block that has, you know, an example of all the different typologies so that it can kind of be extrapolated to other areas as well. It's lots of fun.
Yeah, no, and I'd be happy to, I mean, this presentation could be, you know, part of it, so people just see what the elements are of the class and what we look at. If that's where you were thinking of going with this, I don't know, but yeah, no,
And we
because
just to make some of it available so people
Of
know
course.
that this is being done and they don't. And I think so often, and having been, you know, a community advocate for so long, always talking about somebody knocking down a building, something else and trying to stop them from knocking down. And to look this deeply at a building or a collection of buildings, and really to know that anybody is doing it is like, makes me want to weep. I think it's so great, you know, because often that's not the picture that we get when we're dealing with people who are just kind of wanting to build a building and not gonna put it down, put another one up without thinking about any of this. It's a rich thinking.
And I think the future of the successful resilient, you know, resiliency architect, especially when dealing with historic fabric, will just be to know how to know more. And whether that's knowing more through, you know, kind of knowing to look at Ancestry and newspaper and find the address every time it appeared in any newspaper, ever. To kind of using a tool, and maybe everybody becomes smarter and more kind of able to do this on their own. But I think the idea that historic preservation is just about looking like something, rather than kind of preserving a community, a sense of collectivity, a kind of reliance on people collaborating and relying on one another. And so that's what these are images of. I mean, if you notice, the building that I showed did not ultimately get preserved. Now, I'm the one that would be more likely to preserve this. Debbie would go in and tell the student, just tear it down, it's horrible. Are you kidding? That's been a terrible building. It's a not contributing building. No, it's a really, I mean, a 70s, 60s, late 60s building like that. Low floor ceilings.
Lots of parking.
And I'm like, oh, come on, there's something about those, I love those balconies, they have those huge railings. So this particular student kind of took some aspects of it and reinterpreted it. But I mean, I'm not saying that these are just students too. This is their first pass at it. It could be the worst pass ever. Or it could be a genius move, like, you know, dumb luck kind of thing. But it's not supposed to be like these are solving the problems for the city. But the hope is that they'll be showing a mechanism, and you know, somebody else could do this much better than a student. But just showing a process for understanding. That's where the tool is coming in. It could be the basis for a new resilient strategy, you know, in the future.
And are any of these things that suggest I mean, are many of these something that as a private owner, one would have access to or be able to do within the city in terms of the resiliency components? I mean, or are these kind of pie in the sky?
They're all in the city approved report on what can be available. Not all of them are policies that have yet been changed, so we're hoping the city, you know, the policymakers will address them and you know, work with staff to address the first policies that need to be changed so that more can be implemented. So even just putting a commercial space in the first floor of a residential, you know, zone would not happen today. I mean, that has to really change. If that's gonna happen, but that's one of the first ways in which you can save a building and provide a private building owner with a better kind of return on that investment, while they keep that property intact as a physical form, as a starting point. But you know, there are the class is supposed to is intended to help kind of in partnership with the city, is to really kind of think together.
Think outside the box and maybe inspire them to do something similar.
Exactly.
I mean, just by lifting the building is gonna, you know, increase the value of the property.
Well, I think, you know, Tom Mooney, our planning director, talks all the time about what that first floor might look like in the future. They might be abandoning that first floor where people are living, and it may turn into a different type of useful space. And how do people live on that second and third and fourth floor, and can you build a fifth floor sort of behind it? You know, so that to me, I think is pretty fascinating, and you see that in other parts of the world. It's not that it's not happening, right? It's happening in Europe, it happens in different places. We just maybe haven't seen it yet, but we probably will. But how do we make it happen at the right time? What are the safety precautions? What are all of the Florida building code rules? I mean, just all of that becomes quite a lot to work through. But what Point City does is introduce the concept in the context of Miami Beach, I think. And I love this class because then it says, well, here's an actual building and what does that look like? And it's pretty amazing.
Right, and
It really is.
yeah, it's
Super
sort of
inspiring.
very inspiring, and it makes me think of, as I said before, that this ought to be something that more people know about. That they're able to either find a slide deck somewhere on the city's website, or find a way to go in and look. Maybe they have a building like 751 Meridian. Or maybe I would expect you also deal with contributing.
Oh, every building, yeah, the whole block.
So-
Yeah.
So they could look at any type of building. And
This particular student just stuck to my like list of things that they had to do better than the other students. There were other students who just like said, I'm going to skip this particular drawing and just go right to this other thing. And I just wanted to show you an example of some student kind of.
But it's wonderful,
Yeah.
and I really appreciate it. Anybody have any more questions for John?
The studio webpage with previous projects that we.
No, we don't, but I'd be
Okay.
happy to, yeah, we don't really have a kind of mechanism for that necessarily, but I'd be happy to, can provide, and as long as each of the images has a student name on it,
Yeah.
I think that's.
We can do that. We have a spot where we have visioning workshops and we have the workshop we did in
'Cause I-
2021.
Yes,
We can simply add to that.
you can just
and put
add those
the
images onto
Decks on,
there.
because they all have the student names.
Yeah, exactly, that's
That'd
good,
be
We can do
great.
that.
because they
And then we
read
can
in the
highlight that in the
beginning.
newsletter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because I think it's really, people, once they start going there, it becomes kind of fun, you know, it's always, because I know on Facebook or other social media, when somebody posts something about, something was on the other day about the old Pan Coast, you know, it gets a lot of attention. People go on there and say, hey, was that right next to the Dunley, which was in back of the what's it? Oh, yeah, I think so, and then more pictures appear. So people are interested in the fabric, yeah, right.
Yeah, something Amy said, raised a question for me. In terms of preserving properties and, anticipating sea level rise, are existing buildings able to, let's say you just want to abandon the first floor, the floor, are the foundation, can buildings handle water coming at that level?
It depends, and it would depend on what concrete did they use? Did they use one of the builders from the 30s that just poured like sea sand and salt into the concrete and like as their aggregate? Or is it like really structurally sound? The buildings from the 60s and 70s in some cases have better concrete. But I guess the point of the class, because you're right, I mean, each building would take a much more in-depth survey to understand what can be done, whether it needs to be reinforced, the foundation needs to be reinforced, and how, and what that would cost, and things like that. Because we don't have access to these properties, we don't do that, but that's a great question, and a very important one.
There are no other questions. We'll just say thank you,
both.
both of you. Yeah, we learned a lot, and I think as Noel said, Amy, you were putting links to these things somehow, some way to be able to get the news out. And I'll be an ambassador for it, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, it's tricky with student work too, because you're not always, it's not my work and it's not the city's work, which is why, and so somebody might see their building in 2070 in a way that infuriates them, like, that they don't want to see it like that. They think, this is my private property, who is doing this?
Who's that?
Yeah, and then we kind of were like, this is about, from the university perspective, about training the future architects to be prepared for the kinds of challenges they might face.
Yeah.
And kind of putting them up front. It wasn't so much to show, and for policymakers, members who
Yeah.
presumably would understand this and talk about this in the context of, okay, what policies do we look at if we're aiming to, say, kayak on king tides? Like maybe there's a pilot someplace that's super low where there could be like a kayaking route through the city during a king tide someday. I'm not saying
Well,
it's
the other
now,
day
but
there was people
I'm
doing
just
it.
saying, play very, very carefully, like it would have to be carefully coordinated, but I'm just saying like, what if this helped you to think about that? I had never thought about that before, just thinking about this, but then what policies would it take? So it wasn't really to kind of, make people crazy about what students are doing with their buildings.
No, it's all the options and things,
Yeah.
possibilities,
Yeah,
to be able to start to see the possibilities.
to see possibilities. And maybe there's something you like, and maybe there's something you don't like, and that could also be a good,
That's
very
good
important,
information.
very important, conversation starter.
Yeah, and I heard a story the other day, that was talking about, someone from Copenhagen, in a resiliency conversation saying, well, we used to have trouble, getting people to think outside the box in the city. And then we started to make sure that we hired a diverse mix of educational backgrounds and interests, and we got people really thinking, and we got better performance rates, we got more innovative solutions, we started to not see the same old, because they were looking in possibilities different ways. That's what this is. So thank you again and again, and come back and visit us anytime.
Okay.
Maybe we'll come to see you at the HPP.
Oh, come on.
Always welcome.
Always welcome. You're a smiling face. Just please present sometime at HPP. That would be very nice to see.
Thank you guys.
All right, you guys. Thank you.
Okay, we have private property acquisition update.
Yes, we had a couple items we thought we'd bring to the committee just for a bit of a refresher and to let you know where we're at with these couple of really great programs. So we thought we'd do an overview of private property adaptation, which is sponsored and championed by Commissioner Dominguez. And then just an update on the beach block where we're planting a lot of trees, kind of excited. And especially with the storm that just happened, we've got so many pictures and emails from people within the program that are experiencing flood damage. And I expect during this event that there was quite a lot citywide. We've got calls and so I think I'll let Noel talk a little bit about some of where we're at right now and then on the applications. Do you want to have this here?
No, I got it. So this year with our private property application program, it's our second cohort. Our first one kicked off in 2022 and we opened applications for this one. I believe we talked about it before. From February 15th to April 2nd. During that period, we received 48 applications, and we accepted 43 of those. Those accepted applicants are currently doing onboarding calls. I think we've done around 17 onboarding calls so far with them, with our prime consultant, Brazaga. And so the properties range from several multifamily complexes that, some may be like hundreds of units large, and then some are 4 units large and are owned by someone. We also have low and moderate income properties that are participating this year, and we have 2 commercial properties. So this is our first time getting some commercial properties, so we're very pleased about that. We pushed really hard on that communication and it paid off in getting those. So we're excited to partner with all of them. A few of these applicants have already accepted applicants have already talked about some of the storms that happened last week. We were having these calls last week while the storm was going on in some cases, right? And then with our previous cohort, a small update on that, we currently have about 20 applicants who are moving forward with the projects right now from when they started 2 years ago on the entire process. So really exciting time for that program. And
I would just add overall that what the program is it's a matching grant program, and applicants can get up to $17,500 of money from the city to match what they've already spent 50-50. When the project is done, they get reimbursed. And it also includes a $2,500 property assessment, which is an engineering assessment of your property to see what kind of options might work. And that's where, you could have a landscape architect or, you know, structural engineer, depending on the needs of the home, come out and really take a look and provide options. So just giving you an update on that, we expect to have all the on-site visits done by the end of the summer, so that people will have those visits, and then in the fall they'll get the reports. Then the next step is they enter into grant agreements with the city if they choose to go forward, and begin to find the contractors and start to get the work done.
So from the first cohort, you're getting data back on those projects already? So, because it takes a while, obviously.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, we have about 20 that have entered into agreements with the city, near 20, right?
Yeah.
And they're all at different phases, and some of it is, you know, this is a voluntary program and it's homeowner. So it really depends on how quickly they want to move and get the work done. So they sign an agreement with the project, it has to be an approved scope of work, it has to be towards flood mitigation, it can't be like, well, I wanna fix the fence over here, that might be tied into a flooding project, that has to be direct flood mitigation. And it just takes some time, and I would say the top projects are what, definitely pervious pavers, seawalls,
Mechanical assistance equipment, so like
protecting.
lifting your AC units or dryers or washers. Yeah, and Amy brought up a great point. Really, they are taking different amounts of time because a lot of people have come into the program both in the first year and then also in this year, just kind of seeking answers on how they can reduce flooding on their properties. Without really a project in mind or any kind of preconceived notions of what flood mitigation is. And so when we provide them their assessment report with our consultant Zaga, even if they didn't move forward with the project last year, we still got feedback from people saying that the information itself was helpful. And so that was a very, even if they didn't feel like they were in a financial situation to move forward with a large project, right? They said, at least I know what I can do. And so that's been one of the kind of, encouraging things to learn, is that people really are seeking knowledge and are seeking a contractor or an engineering or a design professional to provide them some kind of information without trying to sell them something further.
Right, exactly.
And Noel will be presenting this program at a national conference next month.
Okay.
Next week. Yes, the National
Sooner.
Association of Floodplain Managers, which is a really big deal.
Where is it?
It's in Salt Lake City.
How awesome.
Yeah, so we were invited, and so he gets to go, and we're really excited for him, but it really, we have so much interest in this program for other cities, from other cities and other states, and just so you know, it's pretty cool, and it really reflects well, I think, on the city, and other cities trying to copy the program too.
And Mark was the initial sponsor.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Another Georgia Tech engineer.
That's a great update. We'll look forward to the video on that.
This
Don't be
is a
shy.
big program to manage, and he does a wonderful job.
Thank you. Is there something else?
Yeah, we just had an update on trees because we're super excited about this. We will be planting up to 600 trees on the beach lawn, and you'll be seeing notifications coming out. And we're really excited about it. It's part of our GeoBond project, and it's important, for this heat we're experiencing and shade, as well as stability and, of the shoreline and the dune system too. So you'll be seeing those, and we actually have a full map where people can see where the trees are going to go. It's a very a beautiful palette of all different types of trees. Very strategically aware that we don't want to block anybody's views, but that the shade is needed. So just a heads up, that's a big project coming up soon. It is a resilience project. And, hopefully by the end of the summer, we will have 600 trees. Yeah.
Where do you see that? Is that the GeoBond project? Or is
It's a GeoBond project. Yep, so we have $5 million to plant trees. We've spent about 2.2 million so far. And this is like kind of the next big one.
Terrific.
I guess the 41st Street project sounds exciting too. That came out, that was beautiful. So, when is that supposed to start?
First Street?
41st.
Oh, 41st Street, which one?
The whole redo of 41st Street. Is that what it is?
Yeah, right now what they're working on is some pipes.
No, it's a
Oh.
bridge. Yeah, but the rendition,
then
the large
after-
rendition of all 41st Street, the
Is that another
sidewalk.
Like the big-
Oh,
master
that thing, that's a good question.
Yeah, a big room, I'm not sure where that's at right now.
Pretty firm.
But thank
That's
you.
one committee I don't coach, so.
You go to all the other ones, yeah.
So that was just a tease. Right
Yes,
down the
Yeah,
large
so we'll have to.
rendition.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
That was
Coming.
that was a very rich meeting.
Right, kind of a different kind of meeting, right?
Absolutely, a different kind of meeting.
Yeah.
So, the motion.
Yeah.
Okay, Karen makes a motion, Ron seconds it,
Seconded.
and we are all in favor?
Yes, and we will see you back here July 17th at 4:30.
Yes.
That should be in your house.
Yeah, and I'm going through the minutes, because I know we have agenda items that we
We
didn't
do.
get to, but you and I can.
Email.
Okay, great, thank you so much.
Perfect.